Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock. You're tuned into news and views on Salam Media, and we're crossing over to the Western Cape. We will be talking to esteemed journalist and author, and that, of course, is you, Shafiq Morton. Assalamu alaikum, and many, many congratulations on the launch of your latest book. Welcome to Salam Media.
Yes, and thank you very much for those kind wishes.
Lovely to have you on the show this morning. And let's start by talking about this particular book. What motivated you to go on this journey? Because it clearly was a journey of, I should imagine, lots and lots of research, and then finally, the book being written and then launched. What was the motivation behind this?
It's indeed. In fact, this was actually a commission book by OCAF South Africa in their series, Leaders and Legacies. And I'd already done a book on Tuan Guru and one on Shah Abu Bakr Effendi. And it was decided at the inspiration of Haroon Kalla that we should actually try and record as much as we could the evidence of the Awliya, or as we call them, the Kramats, to record and to recall as much of the history as we could before it gets finally forgotten. And that became the challenge, to try and put all of this into a book. And I've said to anybody who asks me questions about it, the book has been through oral tradition. It's been experiential through my experiences of visiting the Kramats for more than 40 years. And it's been anecdotal, because history is always a question of, you've got a bit of information there, a bit of information there, and it's a question of connecting the dots. So that's essentially what we've done. Obviously, we've tried to back up whatever we've had academically as much as we can. But it's more a communal story that we're focusing on here, the circle of the saints, the stories of Kramats at the Cape. Very historical people who were, in fact, you could say, the foundation stones of Islam, in fact, in South Africa.
Subhanallah. And you're so correct in saying that lots of what is contained in the book is anecdotal, and all the more reason for why this book should have been written, because there was the concern that if these stories are not documented, our future generations will lose a huge part of our history. They won't know where and why Muslims have actually landed in the Cape, and the reason why we have a sizable number of Muslims in South Africa.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the story. And the emotional side of the story is that a lot of the people who are buried in our soil as Kramats, not all of them, but a lot of them, were sent here as exiles by the Dutch East India Company from a period of about 1668 to 1795. And they were sent here for a number of reasons. They were rebelling against colonialism. They were resisting colonialism. They were pious Muslims, so they were not prepared to compromise their principles and their values. And number three, they were very courageous. So what happened is that the Dutch East India Company, concerned about Islam, because Islam is a problem to it, because the Muslims are the ones who resist, decides to send a number of these leaders in exile to the furthest point of the world, which was in those days the Cape of Good Hope, or Cape Town. And ironically, great Muslim figures, people like Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar, who was an international scholar before he even came to the Cape, were sent to the Cape. And what they did was they planted the seed of Islam in what at that time was the furthest point of empire. And that is one of the reasons why we have a strong Muslim community in Cape Town at the tip of Africa.
Amazing and beautiful indeed. You spoke about the Dutch East India Company. There were also concerns back in the day, going back in history, obviously, that already in India there was, which obviously our forefathers perhaps didn't identify it then, but a strong anti-Islam movement taking shape in India under colonial rule. And of course, that then speaks to the whole concept of divide and rule, does it not?
No, it does. I mean, the Dutch who took over from the Portuguese were very skillful at dividing and ruling in Indonesia. They would compromise a lot of the sultans. In fact, some of the sultans in Indonesia sold out their ulama, their sheikhs who came to the Cape. And the interesting thing is this was a model that the English would follow in India. The Indian colonization era of the British came after the Dutch one. But the interesting thing is that in those days and historically, there'd been a lot of connection and contact between the Indian subcontinent and Indonesia, or the Far East as it was called, because people like Sheikh Yusuf of Makassar actually studied in India for a while. One of the sheikhs, he studied in Bijapur. Very few people know that, and got an ijaza there. And then he moved across the world in his 26-year journey of studying. And when Sheikh Yusuf was in exile in Ceylon, for example, the Sultan of the Mughal Empire, Aurangzeb, told the Dutch not to harm Sheikh Yusuf. And in those days, Aurangzeb was a sultan of 150 million subjects in India, which in those days was still an economic powerhouse. This is just before the British moved in. So yes, the Indian question comes into it very strongly. And the forerunner of what happens in India is what happened in Indonesia.
Absolutely steeped in history. Let's go for an ad break. When we come more, you can share some more gems of this amazing book with us right here on Salam Media, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
Gaza needs your support more than ever. Homes have been shattered and families have lost everything. With your support, our teams are delivering clean water tankers, feeding the hungry, and assisting orphans who have no one left. Let us give Gaza whatever help we can. African Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. It is 20 after 8 o'clock. And of course, we are talking with award-winning journalist and author Shafiq Morton. We are talking about his latest work, and what I find striking is that the launch was held at the Zico Slave Lodge in Cape Town, which we do know is a venue steeped in history. Talk to us more about why this particular venue was chosen, Shafiq.
The reason for choosing this venue is that the time has come, number one, for the Muslim community of South Africa to recolonize, and I'm using those words advisedly, public spaces. These public spaces that were used by the colonialists and by the apartheid masters are now open to everybody. And it's high time that as a community, we also start to use these spaces. Number two, the symbolic significance runs deep because the slave lodge is where the slaves of the Dutch East India Company were housed. These are the people to whom these sheikhs administered. And you'll find people such as Tuan Said Alwi al-Hibshi, who's buried in the town of Bar in the Boerkaap, where he actually spent some time. In fact, a lot of the exiles, at some stage or another, as part of their rite of passage, would have had to have spent some time at the slave lodge, either before going out to be exiled or after they had served their prison sentences or whatever. The slave lodge is where they would have to gravitate to. The slave lodge is one of the saddest buildings in the city because it's a well-known fact, and you can read this in the archive, you can read this in historical accounts, that the women of the slave lodge were particularly marginalized, and they were used as prostitutes by the men of the Dutch East India Company. So at night, while the men would be emptying the slop buckets into the canal outside, the men of the VOC would be lining up to use the woman. I mean, this is absolutely despicable. It's horrible. But this is the truth of the history of the Cape, the bitter history of the Cape. And these traumatized people is to whom a lot of these shuyukh administered and educated and taught about Islam. People living under the most horrific conditions. And when you read accounts of what the slave lodge was at the time, your blood runs cold, or either a tear starts running out your eye. So that is what the slave lodge symbolized, what it is. And the reason why, as modern-day Muslims, we need to re-energize these spaces. And the symbolism of the launch is this is probably the first time ever that the descendants of an enslaved community had gone back into the lodge to actually celebrate something that had to do with emancipation.
Wow. I'd like to digress ever so slightly here and talk about, you mentioned that our communities should start occupying these spaces, spaces which were were banned to us as Black and brown people. So here now is the opportunity for us to continue occupying these spaces, getting to truly know our history, thanks to you, and by way of the type of books that you are publishing, writing, and putting out in the public space as well. Very, very important for our current and future generations to understand our history, where we come from, what we've suffered, and to uphold our dignity. But that also leads me to the issue around gentrification and the Kramats. Is there not perhaps a fear that eventually those areas will then be populated by the wealthy and just overtake, and people won't have access perhaps to the Kramats?
Julie, that is a very relevant question, and I'm glad you asked it, because some of our very important Kramats, Sheikh Nur al-Mubin and Tuan Said Jafar, Hazrat Sahibji, and Sayyid Ali Basir all lie on the slopes of Camps Bay, which is a upmarket suburb, and also on the slopes of a place called Oudekraal, which is breathtakingly beautiful, but which is a very historical area because Oudekraal is also where the Khoisan, or the Khoi, used to herd their cattle. They used to herd their cattle over Oudekraal towards Hout Bay for the summer pasturages. And in the 1990s, there was an effort by a family called the Vihan family to actually use the land for a suburban development, an upmarket development. And in the process of this development, a lot of the graves, and there are many, many historical graves on the slopes of Oudekraal. There are hundreds of graves there. And what happened was that the whole issue went to court, and the High Court eventually ruled after a very lengthy process, more than 10 years, that because the Vihan family had been awarded the land under dubious circumstances during apartheid, the land must stay as it can't be developed. And subsequently, the Cape Mazar Society has managed to get the Karamats there, in fact, a lot of the Karamats, to be declared heritage sites.
Wow.
And there is a move afoot to even try and get some of our Karamats declared United Nations heritage sites, which means that they're inviolable, which means you can't develop around them, you can't develop over them, you can't touch them. So alhamdulillah for that. So in a small way, some of the Karamats are protected from gentrification. But in the Boerkaap, it's a different matter, because the historical cemetery, the Tana Baru, just recently, parts of it put up for sale by families who have violated the Awqaf or the Waqf of the land. So we have to be on guard all the time to protect our heritage. We also deal with a local government that is not very sympathetic, it seems, to Islamic heritage. So it's another reason to stay on your toes. Heritage is an active process of preservation. It's an active process of ensuring that people do not forget. And again, as I've said, if people use these spaces, then the authorities hopefully will leave them alone.
Inshallah. So tell us about the book, Shafiq. Do you have lots of photos of these historical kramats and other pictures of historical significance contained in the book?
Yeah, I mean, each chapter of the book starts off with a photograph that I've taken. There are some historical pictures in the book, but the focus was to sort of try and look at it from through the lens of today. So each chapter will have a picture of the kramat or the place where the kramat is situated. And we deal with about 32 individuals and try as best as we can to tell their stories. And I hasten to add, this is a book of stories. There are certain academics who seem to think that this has to be an academic work. This is a book of stories. This is a book to ensure that our children, if we read it, will be inspired to research our history further. They'll be inspired to visit the kramats, to remember our history, and to remember who they are. And of course, if a young person knows where they come from, they're going to know where they're going to. The idea of the book is to create an awareness and to record history before it disappears. I mean, during the process of writing the book, 4 people gave me information passed on. So our oral history is disappearing very quickly because today everybody remembers things with data, and data gets deleted. So we have to, as much as we can, and I urge anybody listening today, get your family history before it's forgotten, because these are precious memories. And if we know who we are, it means we know where we can go to. It's a cliche, I know, but it's so important to have an identity.
Absolutely. How long did it take you to put the book together? And does it also suggest that perhaps there will be a sequel to this book, or perhaps, something similar regarding the history of the Cape Malays or the Cape Muslims?
Look, I mean, I'm hoping that there is lots of follow-up. Um, I think this kind of work needs to be extended to the other parts of South Africa. I've always been a great believer that the Indian community of South Africa, so-called, has a history that really needs to be consolidated. I've seen glimpses of it, and we really need to get somebody young and enthusiastic to start focusing on that as well. And the important thing is we have to create a heritage, we have to create a legacy. And my biggest hope is that hopefully I've managed to open the door to a communal legacy, because if we don't say who we are now, going forward in South Africa, we will find ourselves written out of history, and we certainly don't want that to happen.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of your efforts, and of course
Ameen.
Awqaf South Africa, who actually commissioned you to do this work. Where is the book available?
Well, it's going to be rolled out in the Gauteng area. I think that Ikra booksellers have got stock. It's also online at Beit al Hikmah. If you just go onto the internet, you'll find where they are. I think it will be going on to take a lot quite soon. I'm not too sure. But I do know that in your part of the world, Julie, I know that Ikra books have got stock. I'm sure they'll be able to do deliveries, and Beit al Hikmah, based in KZN, do online, so you can order them, they will be able to deliver it to your doorstep. In the Cape, it's available at Exclusives, Bargain Books, Captain 96, who also do online deliveries, and other booksellers. So it will be widely available moving forward.
And I would urge each and every Muslim family in the country, not only the Western Cape, but throughout South Africa, to get a hold of a copy of this book, because it truly, truly is a part of our history which we need to understand and pass down to our future generations. Shafiq Morton, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your efforts. Wonderful talking with you. Hope to talk with you some more in the future. You go well. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome, salam. Sure. Thank you very much.
That was Shafiq Morton, esteemed journalist and author. And of course, we were talking about his just recently launched book, and of course, The Circle of Saints, documenting the history of the early Muslims in South Africa, and of course, the kramats throughout the Western Cape. Please, please, please get yourselves a copy of the book, and let's get to understand truly who we are. Let's appreciate our heritage, and let's add to ourselves as a strong Muslim identity in South Africa going forward. It is exactly 8:34. This is News and Views on Salam Media.